My name is Kirby Lockard, and you're watching one of the Design Drawing Videotapes. This is a series of 10 videos designed to help students of architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design learn to draw freehand perspective sketches. This particular tape is the last one in the series. It's about drawing the contents, the furnishings, that go in interior perspectives. And like the other tapes, to get the real value out of them, you're going to have to draw along with me. They're not really intended just to watch as entertainment, but they're recorded at a pace that I hope will allow you to make the same drawings I'm making. In order to do that, you're going to need a small set of drawing pencils or drawing implements, like I have in this little blue glass. First thing you're going to need are two sort of line-making tools, marking pens, or something that you can draw rather quick freehand lines with. A fine one and one that's a little fatter. Then you're going to need a stack of Prismacolor pencils. I'm not sure we'll get to use all these, but this is the palette that I normally use in making sketches on buff tracing paper. White Prismacolor and black Prismacolor pencils just to indicate light. Non-photo blue for skies. Orange and a crimson red for masonry and terracotta brick kinds of colors. Two greens, I prefer apple green, yellow greens, like apple green and olive green, and some sort of brown like raw umber. Now, if you have this set of equipment and a supply of yellow tracing paper and the blank drawings, the printed material that came along with the videotape, we're ready to start drawing interior perspectives. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the sort of area of interest that is available in interior perspectives. You may have to deal with interiors someday that are this dull. If you're an interior designer, I hope an architect would never leave you with this dull an interior space, because the first category of interest in drawing interior perspectives is the ability to see beyond the space you're in. If I can see either outside beyond this space, and I can see a tree out there or a landscape, or if it is an interior perspective, if I can simply see other people in that space and some indication of a space beyond, so that I have some visual relief, so that there's an extension beyond the space I'm actually in, then the whole perspective gains interest. The second area of interest that's available in interior perspectives is that comes from the materials or textures or colors of the surfaces. For instance, if the floor is a particular material, if it has a color and a unit size and a variation or a configuration, then that's one area of interest. The walls are another, and the final one is the ceiling. Now, we talked about those textures and materials in a previous videotape, and we'll talk about it a little bit in this videotape. The third area, and that's the area we're going to begin with, is the stuff, the furnishings that actually sit or stand in the space. The tables, the chairs, the storage units, the desks, the pianos, all that sort of set of stuff with which we furnish the places we live in. And it's that set of stuff that I'll begin talking about in the videotape. I'd like you to take the drawing out of the packet that looks like this. It shows the two figures standing beside what is a 30-inch cube. And I'd like to demonstrate the usefulness of the 30-inch cube as a module with which to draw all the furnishings you'll ever need in interior perspective. So let's lay down a new piece of yellow paper over that basic 30-inch cube and make a table out of it. Very easy to do because a bridge table is just about a 30-inch cube, and all we have to do really is draw legs at the four corners and make sure your legs have thickness. Make them 3-line legs so that they have thickness to them. Draw the top, and it ought to probably be a little thicker than the legs. We're just drawing your basic Parsons table, kind of bridge table. And the back leg would be about there. Okay, now to go along with the table, we're going to draw a chair. But notice that once we've drawn the table, and the table is correct, it becomes much more easy, much more accurate to draw a chair, because we can start about halfway up, because we know that's about the height of chairs, and we're certain that we have drawn an accurate table to begin with. We can draw a little seat extending underneath the table. We can draw 4 legs, which come down to reach the floor. We can extend the back 2 legs up to there and put a back on the chair like that. Now we have drawn a very characterless chair, and that brings me to one of the points I want to make about drawing the furniture to put in your interior perspective. This will apply to architects, and it will apply to at least the first stages of interior design. When you are simply trying to draw generic furniture, and you're studying furniture arrangements and placement and numbers of pieces, and you haven't yet gotten to questions of style, of furniture finishes or colors or upholstery fabrics or configurations, you're simply trying to decide whether this particular room should have 3 chairs or 8 chairs, and should they be big chairs or little chairs. So you're stopping well short of style. To do that, you need to be able to draw furniture that's completely characterless, that is vanilla, like this chair. And so one of the options always, when you don't want to call that much attention to the furnishings themselves, is to draw this kind of chair. And we call this Plato's chair. Now the other option, which is the opposite, and also takes the piece of furniture out of the design realm, is to draw a very special, known chair. And I'm going to try to do that over here. I'm going to try to draw a chair that does something like this, if my memory is right. And that probably doesn't tell you as much as these legs will. And when I begin to draw those, probably maybe some of you are familiar with Knoll's collection of furniture, will recognize that the chair I'm trying to draw is one of Harry Bertoia's wire chairs. And if I draw the wires, it maybe will become more apparent. So that anyone who's ever seen a Bertoia chair, once they begin to see even this little crude example here, will say, oh, it's a Bertoia chair, and they won't think anything more about it. I think the biggest pitfall, particularly for architects, is to try to design the furniture yourself. You get into big trouble because it will call so much attention to itself that many times, particularly when in the early stages when you're just trying to get your client's agreement and your agreement, your personal evaluation as a designer of where the furniture should go and how big it should be and how many pieces, it's better to draw the completely vanilla kind of furniture. Just for fun, let's draw a couple of other chairs that you can safely draw, or one other. Do you remember? Probably you can draw with me a seat like this. Let's draw the seat coming toward us this time, okay? There's the seat. Now, we're going to make the seat sag a little, just a little, and we're going to draw pieces of wood like that. And then the back is going to come up and have a little knob on the post, and it's going to have canvas across the back like that, and it's going to have an arm that comes out like this, and an arm that comes out like that. And the most distinctive thing about this chair, and what I hope will make you recognize, is the configuration of its cross-shaped legs like that. And you say, oh, okay, that's a director's chair. I know what that chair is. Now, there's a number of chairs that you can learn to draw like that. The typical folding chair, which looks like this. And remember, the back always has that. And if you have the time, you draw that little thickness of the tubing that goes around the back. And unlike the others, this chair's legs fold like this, always. They also are that cross shape, but instead of going across the front of the chair, they go across the sides of the chair. So you can develop a limited palette of chairs, and you should, which you can draw dependably, but which call no attention to themselves. Let me talk about one other thing now that is often quite difficult for people drawing interiors, interior perspective and furnishings, and that is plan circles. And I'd like you to draw right over here 2 vertical lines like this. And what we're going to draw is a poker chip stack, just like a stack of poker chips of planned circles. Let's draw the circle at the bottom of the stack about like that, if you will. The circle at eye level, we'll simply see the edge like that. That's all we'll see. Halfway up the stack, we'll see a circle that probably looks something like that. And here we'll see an even flatter circle. Here we'll see a little fatter circle. So that when you draw planned circles, you need to be aware of where they are in relationship to eye level, so you have this vision of a stack of poker chips. For instance, if we were going to draw a circular lamp, a cylindrical lamp right on that table, we could draw its footprint like that. It would be similar to that because it's about on that level. Then here it would get an even skinnier circle. If we drew a little neck like that, then we could draw the bottom of the lamp shade, and it's just going to be barely curved. But be careful with this. Once we get above eye level, the curve reverses, and now we see only the curving top of the lamp shade. We don't see down into the lamp. And one of the biggest mistakes in drawing planned circles, and you'll see this in some very nice renderings, is that unaccountably you're able to see down into lampshades that are above eye level. So let me give you one other example of planned circles, and that's their use in rotating furniture. Let's say that we want to rotate that basic cube that we started out with. And if you can see down through here, I'm going to redraw it real quickly. And let's say that there's the basic cube. And I want to draw a club chair, but I want it rotated. In fact, I want to rotate it 45 degrees. So the first thing I do is draw a circle, a planned circle, just like a lazy Susan, on which this cube is sitting. And it's one of those planned circles we just practiced drawing. And it's going to be maybe something like that. The other thing about planned circles is you don't want to tip them toward perspective, and maybe I've done that a little bit. You want to draw them dead level. They will respond even if you draw them dead level. So the circle really wants to be more like that, and maybe more like that. Okay, now if I just draw the diagonal of the circle, that will be at 45 degrees, and I can go off over here to eye level and find a vanishing point for my new chair. With that information, I can draw the two sides of the chair, the sides of the chair's footprint, rather, like that. So there will be the two sides of the chair, and then this will be the chair's actual footprint. So that's the new chair. Now the other vanishing point is going to be so far away I won't be able to reach it, so I'm just going to respond to it by slightly converging those. Now I'm going to pull up the corners, and I'm going to draw the new rotated 30-inch cube that I need to draw this chair. Okay, there it is. Now notice that it still looks like it's sitting on the floor. It simply has swiveled on that red lazy Susan. It hasn't come up off the floor. A lot of the chairs that beginning delineators first draw, when they try to turn them in perspective, look like they're popping wheelies. They look like they have the back two legs up off the floor and are tipped forward. That's because they're using much too fat a circle of rotation. So to keep your furniture looking like it's sitting on the floor, always draw this lazy Susan and rotate the furniture on that red circle. Let me show you by overlaying this one thing, one other kind of chair that you can draw. That's kind of fun is and this is will be a very big one. They're not quite a 30-inch cube, but let's draw a British officer's chair. They're sort of fun. They have arms that look kind of like that. They come over and usually sort of button on to the front leg. They have wooden dowel frame like that, and the back is usually a swivel connected here, and it looks something like that. Now, it's another one of those chair forms that you can learn to draw if you first master the kind of basic cubic structure, and mine is too big. They aren't really 30 inches. They're probably more like 24. So the chair would really have to be cut down like that. But it uses the same underlying perspective cubic structure that allows us to draw all other furniture. Let's extend the original. I'm going to peel back to the first drawing, and we're going to extend this first cube and make a sofa out of it and add just a little style. So let's redraw this cube. Let's add one right beside it here. And you can just estimate that second cube. Okay, now this is a love seat. It's only a small 60-inch sofa, and we're going to cut in the seat pocket just by drawing the thickness of the arms like that, and then a little more than halfway down we're going to draw a line like this, which is the front edge of the seat. We draw the top of the arms going back toward the vanishing point, and we draw the back like that, and we have the seat pocket. We want to draw cushions. We can come on down with a little more thickness. This is the divider, and we can then draw, if it's just two cushions like that. If we want to draw a cushion back, we can slope them, put a little softness on their back, and maybe add buttons like that. If we wanted to add little pillows in the corner, we could do that. But that's the basic kind of, and we should pull up, if we want to, we can pull up the bottom so that it stands up on legs like this. Now beyond that basic sofa, we can add style, we can add curves and different configurations to the sofa, different thicknesses, but we begin always by drawing that underlying structure based on a 30-inch cube. It works for desks, it works for dining tables because they are about 29 or 30 inches high. Two of these cubes, this same size module we used to draw the love seat, make a perfect executive desk because most of those are 30 by 60 by 30. The next step would be to add whatever style you would like to the sofa. And that would depend on what you were trying to do in the room, what particular other furniture you had in mind and what you'd like to relate to. But it's best conceived as an additive, as a sort of adjustment to the basic cubic perspective frame. There's several other things that are handy to draw, but let's go back for a moment to this one and draw figures around the table, because I want to emphasize that whenever you can, you should draw figures in combination with the furniture. Let's draw this cube, and let's draw two people seated at this table. And if I'm drawing them in a rough way, I can actually start by just drawing the figures without the furniture. Now I know that a seated figure, it's comfortable to put your elbows on the table, although it may be impolite. It is a perfectly human gesture. It's a comfortable posture like I am right now drawing at this table. And I know that a person's hips are about halfway down, so I can draw the person sitting at the table like this before I draw the chair, and that's not a bad idea. I can draw the other person sitting across like this with the same elbows on the table. And if you sometimes, drawing the figures will actually help you draw the furniture, because then it's a snap to draw the chair that the figure is sitting on. It's a very good idea to draw figures in conjunction with drawing the furniture, just because the furniture is always scaled to the human figure, and it will almost force you to draw the figures in scale if you will just make a habit of including them in any furniture you draw. Now, with that brief introduction about drawing furniture based on the 30-inch module and combining figures with furniture, let's tackle a whole full interior perspective. We'll also try, and if you pulled this drawing out of the packet that came with the videotape, we're going to turn this into a florist shop. Because the other thing that interiors should do, can do, or must do, I think, is communicate the kind of place they are. And sometimes you have to learn to draw the trappings, the signs, the sort of paraphernalia that go along with whatever function it is that you're designing for. So let's take a new piece of tracing paper and put it down over that drawing, and we'll study some ways to make this little space look like a florist shop. The first thing I do perhaps is put a figure right over the near vanishing point. Now that's not always a good idea, but in this case, and I wouldn't put one figure, I'd put a pair of figures. So let's draw a couple standing there, and if it's a florist shop, let's assume that the guy is, his hand is out like that, and there's this thing that looks like a pot, a florist pot, with a flower in it. So it's apparent that this guy has just purchased this flower, and that is a good idea in any sort of retail shop if you'll show someone with packages or having purchased something that came out of the shop. This window would also be a display window. Now we're not going to get as much furniture in a shop, in a florist shop or any shop, as we would in other kinds of interiors. So it's not so much a matter of drawing furniture as it is drawing people and sort of fixtures and the things that would be for sale in such a shop. One of the things you always need to do in interiors is make the horizontal surfaces lie down. So you want to think about adding transverse, particularly transverse textures to all the horizontal surfaces. The same thing applies to soffits, to ceilings, and we have several of those. You can add some lines if you're just going to draw with lines, or better yet, you can take your black Prismacolor pencil and just begin to tone those in a little bit, because they would all be quite dark. And I think that the horizontal ceiling surfaces are one of the first things to which you would normally add tone. There's a ceiling way up there. And this space also has a little balcony. See the little bridge come across there? And it's just a bridge because over here there's space that goes up on the other side of it. And one of the things that you should do in interiors is place the figures and whatever else you have to use in such a way that makes a space read. And I would say that one of the things I do is put some sort of a big tree like a ficus in a big planter there and let it disappear up behind that bridge so that it makes the point by the disappearance of its branches that there is space that goes up behind there. The other thing, while we're talking about indicating space, the other thing that's very important to do in any exterior perspective is indicate the space beyond, whether it's an interior space or in this case it's an exterior space. So what I would do here is probably draw two trees out there, because trees are far and away the best kinds of object to do this indication of continuous space. Because if we see a tree in one window and it extends or appears in another window, we know that there's a continuous exterior space out there. The other thing we can do, there seems to be a building there, if you're working in color, is always add blue sky to the sky beyond any windows, because it immediately tells you that there's exterior space out there and that's a view outward. Okay, now, for the lower area, I think we ought to have a chair, which would give us practice in drawing a chair. But before we draw the chair, let's move a figure down to that level. See, if we just pull a figure like this across on eye level, they're sort of hung on eye level like a pair of pants on a clothesline, and we have to be able to drop them down because this stair tells us that lower level is at least a couple of feet down from this upper level. So we have to bring the figure across and then drop it down so that the head of a figure is going to be probably about that level. Okay, we get a figure there, and it immediately calls our attention to the fact that there's a lower level. And while we're at it, we might just get one on the upper level. And we have to be careful here because we know if that railing's drawn correctly, that it's the kind of a thing a person could lean on. So, and if we made that person tip their head over, we could probably make this person raise their arm in a kind of a gesture that would look as if, and certainly if we did that, like these people knew one another and were talking to one another, which is always a nice thing to do. If you can get just a little human relationship, a little human interaction in your drawings, it's not just a cosmetic thing. I think it's just a nice little sort of grace note to the drawings. Let's see. Down here we were going to put a chair. Now that we've drawn the figure, we can probably draw a chair in scale. And we would probably ought to put a figure sitting in that chair. Maybe talking to this person. Now we also need to draw a lot of flowers if it's a florist shop. And one of the most obvious ways we could make it look like a florist shop would be to write the word florist on the window in gold leaf, but backwards, so that it was apparent that that's the T. Let's see, F-L-O-R-I-S-T, so S might be there, I, R. I don't think I'm going to get quite around with it, but this way it shows most of the word and maybe helps communicate the idea that this is a florist shop. And if we draw a lot of plants in the window, it communicates the fact still further. We ought to have a texture on the lower level, and it could be the same texture as on the upper or different. It doesn't make any difference, but it would be nice if it had a strong transverse pattern to it. If there's any choice, we always choose for horizontal surfaces a transverse kind of pattern, whether it's boards or brick or just joints in the concrete. We try to get as much of this transverse configuration in as we can because that helps the surfaces lie down. Okay, now we have just a few more moments, and using color we might get a little green on the landscape beyond. We might get just a little brick red on this surface. We could take our greens and get some foliage on the ficus tree that grows up into that space. We ought to get some horizontal lines on this soffit to make that horizontal surface lie down. And we ought to get some black Prismacolor pencil because that would be one of the darker surfaces in the space. We ought to darken in this ceiling too, by the way. Now, one thing I'd like to talk about is any sort of graphic thing like a poster or painting that hung on the wall. I would always draw as just that, just a rectangle. I would never attempt to make the painting, actually draw the painting, because it'll probably call too much attention to itself. But if you want to indicate that there is something on the wall there, you can certainly draw the frame, and it'll be very acceptable. The one thing about the brick color, the terracotta color, is it has strong associations with certain architectural surfaces. And whether you're ready to make up your mind or not that should be brick on the floor, the red color will help it look like a floor, because floors are one of the surfaces that are commonly made out of clay or terracotta materials. Okay, let's see what else we could do in the limited time we may have left. We could draw something outside this window, a horizon, and that would let us bring the sky down like this. And that, I think, will help quite a bit. We could make some more material choices, some more surface choices, but tell you what I'm going to do. At this point, one of the most helpful things we could do, and it won't take but a moment, is turn this drawing over, take our white Prismacolor pencil, and simply add white to all the windows. Regardless of what's outside, just take your white Prismacolor pencil and add white beyond the windows. You don't need to do it very neatly, because the thickness of the paper will somehow help even out the crudeness of your tonal application. And you can put it on pretty quick and dirty, and it'll still look pretty good through the thickness of the paper. Okay, now I'm going to turn that over and see if it has any effect. And yeah, I think it does. And I missed one window. I missed this window. Now I can look at it and sort of calmly decide what might still be profitable to do. And the thing I see most clearly to do is spatially profile the whole drawing. Now that includes the people, includes this person's arm, down the leg. I ought to change pens to get a little darker pen. You ought to change to your fat pen at this point. This profile line would go up and over the figure and out and include the arm and back to the railing. Would go across like that, go across here and down there, and here and down there, and come over the flowers like this. This is a profiled spatial edge. So would this be, and over the flowers. And there, and this line. And then we need to take another look at our drawing. Okay. We need to extend this line, and we probably need to draw some other things, just an edge that looks like flowers, like they could be on standing displays, so that this looks like we could draw things like this with pots, so that we get the effect that there is a whole bunch of stuff in this shop, and it's growing sort of floral material. We're a little short on material indications, and I think the easiest one is always, and with a limited time of a videotape, I think I'll choose that one, just because it doesn't take much time to draw, is wood. And I'm going to draw random boards of different width. That also saves time, because whenever you have to make anything standard width, you consume a great deal of time in measuring. So if you can make the boards obviously different widths, you'll save yourself a great deal of time. So we could make that into boards. We could also, if this would help, because we can make this material into boards, and I think it helps call attention to the fact that the space goes up back there, that this is a T-shaped upper sort of mezzanine walkway. We didn't finish the profile around these guys. And these figures need to be profiled, and perhaps a little detail added to them. Now, the one other thing we could do, if we had time, would be to add light coming in. And if I just begin to do that by drawing the shadows that would be cast by this casting edge and this casting edge where the doors are. I don't need to carry the light indication clear back into the room, but if I can just begin it, it will be a nice thing to do. I can also do a little negative rendering here of the tree, and then I can just gradually fade out that shadow as it comes back into the room. Now what that will allow me to do then is put sunlight on this surface and sunlight on this surface, and that's kind of nice. I could probably get a sliver of light coming down like this here, and actually these surfaces that are turned away from the light will all be quite dark, so I could take the time to tone those in. Now I'm probably drawing interiors and probably talking about interiors from an architectural point of view. And those of you that are interior designers may not think I'm taking the design of the interior seriously enough, that I'm simply approaching it graphically and getting it to tell a story, and maybe not talking enough about or spending enough time designing the interior, and I'd have to plead guilty to that. I'm concentrating on drawing the essentials of an interior, on what you need to do graphically just to communicate what kind of an interior it is. And it's true that I'm not spending a lot of time talking about various design options. I'm talking about them as if they were all just graphic options. But interior design is a much more complicated subject, and I apologize for treating it in a kind of cursory way. It is important, though, that you be able to communicate your interiors, whether you're an interior designer or an architect, quickly and relatively crudely like this, to yourself and to your clients to begin the design. I'm not suggesting that you can design this space this easily. It'll take many studies. It will take specific choices of materials, of furnishings, of proportions, of, in the case of a florist shop, display concepts for the flowers and for the plants. It takes a much more attention than I'm able to give it on this brief videotape. I'm simply trying to introduce an approach to drawing interior perspectives and showing you all the things they can communicate, and showing you the sort of tools that are available to you. The integration of figures with the paraphernalia of whatever sort of space it is, the sort of thoughtful placement of the figures and the placement of the furniture. And I hope that comes across successfully. We're going to do one more interior, and I'll try to make it as different as possible from a florist shop. We'll draw more furniture. If you had trouble with this little sketch, I would suggest that you use the technology of the videotapes. Stop the tape, rewind it, and play it back more slowly until you can keep up with me. And if you decide along the way to make completely different choices, please do. Put the figures in different places. Make it a bookstore, or make it the lobby of a hotel, or make it a bank, or make it any kind of space you'd like to make it, and sort of benefit from the practice of communicating what kind of space it is by your choice of furnishings and your placement of figures. The last interior perspective we're going to do is quite a bit different, and it looks like this. It should be the last packet, the last drawing in the packet that came with the videotapes. We need to overlay that, and this space is top lighted, has a skylight, and we're going to furnish it and finish it as an interior perspective. We may change a couple of things about it, and you ought to feel free to do something different than I do. But let's begin by just drawing in the area that's going to be the skylight. And then I'm just going to turn that over right now and color it white on the back. And The reason I'm doing this is the same reason that we've done it in interior perspectives before, is that one of the first distinctions to make in drawing an interior perspective is that we are in a very dark volume, or a relatively dark volume, and we're looking outward, or in this case upward, to a much brighter volume outside the building. So if we white that in and put it back in register, then we can add just a little blue to it, and maybe it'll look like the sky above us. Now, the other thing we're going to imagine in this particular perspective is that the end wall has a fireplace in it, has a big fireplace in it. And let's say, let me get a little finer tipped pen. Let's say that the fireplace has an arch like that, an arched opening. And let's also say that there's a furniture grouping here in front of the fireplace on the floor. And to get us started off, though, I always like to draw a couple of figures in the space just to make sure that I understand how big the space is. So let's draw a cluster of 3 figures over here. And let's draw just a little bit of I'll tell you what, let's take the black Prismacolor pencil and start in to shade some of the under surfaces that we know are going to be dark. Now, they're probably going to be the darkest of all in this perspective, because in this perspective the light is coming from the top. So the undersides of things will be even darker than usual, because those surfaces are all turned in the opposite direction of the entering light, which in this case is coming downward into the space. So all these undersides will be very dark. Well, we can darken those two, and we can darken this one over here. Now, along this wall, along the right-hand wall, I'm going to make a change. And I'm going to draw a storage wall. That goes all the way along there. We haven't drawn one of those yet in the perspective series. And I'm just going to divide it up into bays of maybe 3 feet wide. And we're going to draw all the stuff that goes in storage walls, bookshelves, fold-out desktops, maybe hi-fis, whatever you'd like to put in your storage wall. I'll just draw some books. Books draw really fast. All you have to do is draw a bunch of lines like that, and then make the tops vary, so they're sort of ragged. And then you would take the black Prismacolor pencil and make that quite dark behind them. And I'll finish that in a minute. I want to kind of skip around on the drawing. The next thing I want to do is lay out a furniture arrangement facing the fireplace. And I would draw a line, one of those tapered lines in the perspective across like that, and assume that the backs of the furniture arrangement that's going to face the fireplace start about there. Now, if they're 30-inch cubes, then they go halfway to eye level. If this is where the legs are, this is where eye level is. Better draw that line in again, I think. That's the eye level line. Then the backs of those chairs are going to be somewhere up about here. Now, I have to place them in such a way, I'm drawing 30-inch cubes, remember, that I don't hide, if possible, that corner, because that's kind of neat to see. So I'm going to put them in about like that. Those are the backs of 2 chairs. And this is one of my favorite ways of drawing a furniture arrangement. And once again, it may be a little prejudiced architecturally, because I really don't want to draw the chairs. I don't want them to be a big style thing. And for an interior designer, this might be okay during that time before you want to get into questions of chair style, where you're just thinking arrangement patterns. So that those might be the chairs for the moment. it will always look better if someone is sitting in one of the chairs. So let's have someone sitting in this chair, and then it'll always look good if there's someone standing within the furniture arrangement. In other words, beyond these first two chairs. Now, I think it's better to compose furniture always spatially, so that there are people within the furniture arrangement and there are things behind things, and we begin to get this lapping in space that makes interior perspectives and interiors in general much more interesting. Much more interesting to explore, and it's different to be over there within that furniture arrangement than it is to be here where we are. And the furniture arrangement sort of says, come on over here and I'll show you something that you can't see from where you are now. It adds to the spatial interest of the whole interior if the furniture is composed spatially, if it does something spatially. Okay, now another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make, we haven't drawn masonry yet on an interior, I'm going to make this whole end wall, this pier, this fireplace, and this wall masonry. And we're going to do that sort of quickly. We're not going to spend a lot of time doing it. I'm going to draw this other vanishing line in just so you know where the near vanishing point is, or we're reminded where it is. Now, and then I'm just going to start drawing some masonry joints. I'm not going to take a lot of care with them. I'm going to count on being able to divide the courses up fairly closely. And I'm going to deliberately make them, in other words, I'm not going to aim at precision, so I will be forgiven if they are a little rough. And the way you do that is just to make them deliberately a little uneven, and then nobody will, you're not giving the viewer of your perspective any sort of standard to judge you by. If I drew a few of the brick joints real carefully, then you could look at some of the others and say, they're kind of sloppy. But if they're all sort of equally sloppy, then there's nothing, you can't blame me for anything because they're at least consistent. Now, I'm going to draw a pair of doors out there. I'm just going to draw a window, and I'm going to draw a tree because that's outside. And I want this tree to get started down there, and I want it to extend clear up into the skylight so that I understand that that's an exterior, continuous, and connected space, that the tree disappears and reappears in the skylight. And I'm going to draw the framing of the skylight now. And if I get ahead of you, please don't just drop your pencil and watch. Stop the videotape, rewind it, and catch up with me. Because these videotapes aren't intended to be entertaining. They're intended to be sort of guides for your learning to draw. And to get the value out of them, you really have to draw along with me. Okay. There are guys, and that's kind of nice because, see, then I can take the black and put it in the fireplace opening like this. And it'll just happen to go around this figure's head. And that works out pretty well, I think. We probably want to just touch these surfaces with white because the light's going to be washing right down those. We want to draw some more brick joints. And we have to draw some coming across the fireplace like that. Now, once again, don't try to match them necessarily at the corner, because if you start to match some of them and then others don't match, you will have established that standard by which the rest of your lines will be judged, and you don't want to do that. You want to let them remain sketchy and sloppy, and then they won't be questioned. I'm going to draw just enough on this face to communicate the idea of brick. And then since it's a colored sketch, I can use the most probably powerful brick indication at my disposal, which is simply the color brick. And when I begin to put that on, if there's any doubt about what the material is, there no longer is. So color, when you can use it, is one of the very best aids in indicating a building material or a surface. Now notice again that I would put the texture on the distant surface. In this case, I'm putting it on the farthest wall beyond the furniture. I'm not texturing the furniture. I wouldn't put any textures on the figures. I would keep the textures on the architectural surfaces and on the most distant architectural surfaces. And also, I'd never miss putting them on the floor, but I haven't gotten to the floor yet. Now, over here, I need to draw a chair that's where we see the side of it, like that. And they're pretty easy to draw, and when you do that, I would always draw the kind of armless chair, like the Barcelona chair, only less expensive, perhaps. Something like that. I think those chairs always look good when you're looking at the end of them. And then here maybe we ought to get a little end table. Just a little end table like that. The other thing we have to get is, here we ought to change our chair style, and here an arm won't hurt us. In fact, an arm will probably help us delineate the chair. Notice that I still get to see this hit the floor, and that's important. There ought to be some sort of table out there between the chairs, so I can draw that. And there ought to be some sort of area rug that defines this furniture arrangement. It's maybe like that. Okay. Now, I still have some brick to draw. I can draw a little green. I really ought to add some green to the tree. The color, once again, will help communicate the fact that that's the same tree that is down here and then reappears in the skylight. I can now probably add some, bear down a little on the blue sky. That was a little tentative before. I can come on down with the brick color. And one thing I can do with the brick, and you should do this anytime you have a unit material, I think it's fun to do, is I like to underlay some of the brick courses or some of the individual bricks with orange, because I think it adds that little unit variation that is a characteristic of all unit materials. The ones that are produced individually never had dead uniformity like vinyl gives us. They always had a little sparkle of individuality. And I think the mixture of the orange with the crimson red does that. If I could get a little bit of dark behind this guy, it would help. Yeah, that helps define him. And I need to get brick on this wall, the brick color. And I probably need to get a color for the area rug. And I'm going to make it blue simply because I'm using blue sky, and it won't be an additional color. I ought to, if I can, take the white and hit the tops of things a little so that the light seems to be falling, and I probably ought to hit the floor a little bit because it's an upward facing surface, and with this top illumination coming from the skylight, it would be white. And I need to put a texture on the floor, on the exposed floor, and I'm going to stick with the brick. I'm going to stick with horizontal transverse texture like that. And I'm going to be able to put in just a few head joints, but not many. I'll concentrate on the transverse horizontal lines that will make the floor lie down. I could probably use a few of those or get away with a few of those on that surface and on that surface. They're not indicating anything really except helping to make the surface look like a horizontal surface. I could, of course, decide to make them out of boards, but I don't think I would. Okay, now we're getting close to finished. We need to finish the brick joints, a few of them. And we probably need to profile the whole drawing. We haven't profiled it spatially. And so we ought to do that. The furniture deserves to be profiled. And you would profile right up over the figure and back down, just as if the figure were part of the furniture. This furniture would have a profile line go over it. This figure would have a profile line. I might add just a little detail to that figure. Oh, I need to add quite a bit of detail to my storage wall. I sort of forgot about that, I guess. They're fun to draw. They're very geometrical. For instance, if we want to put a pair of bookcase speakers in, we could just do that real easily. If we wanted to make a desk, we could do that, and we should do that because we need some indication in the storage wall of how deep it is. So occasionally we need to have an open shelf. One of the things that you can draw on those open shelves, I didn't quite give that one enough room, is a globe, which looks good. You can draw various kinds of figurines. You can draw doors, in this case cabinet doors. But you should find one or two places in each shelving bay to show how deep the shelving is, where you see the full depth of the shelving. Okay, now we need to take a look, and at about this time in any drawing, you need to ask yourself, what can I do that will benefit the drawing without messing it up in the few minutes I have? And at that point, you want to maybe spend more time looking and analyzing than you actually do in drawing. For instance, here I can, with benefit, I think, add a few head joints to the brick pattern, just to show that it's brick and not boards or some other material. I think I could beneficially add a brown color. In this case, I'm going to use the raw umber to the whole woody, what would be wood in the bookshelf. I could take the colors that I am already using, and this is always advisable, I think, and color some of the books. And I can lighten up on those or darken up on those, and I'd also use the blue. And I could probably use a little blue on the globe, which might help it look like a globe, because right now it looks sort of like a big pumpkin or something. I'm going to take a little orange and just touch the backs of these chairs. Now, you would want to hesitate in doing that to make sure that you want that color is going to be non-controversial or that you're serious about that color. But I think we're just about finished with this. Now, let's see, the speakers need a little depth. The underside of any shelf needs just a little attention. And I think we're done. We need a little more brick over here. Now, let me talk to you as I draw a few more lines. Notice where we place the textures. Notice that we indicate a furniture arrangement without having to draw the details of the furniture. Notice that the figure placement helps the furniture arrangement read. The one thing we didn't do was draw figures on this upper level because there was a set of steps here that we kind of ignored. But we should draw figures up there. So the tree, notice the tree tells us that there's continuous space in the distance, beyond or on the outside of this perspective. And notice that we have a very limited palette of colors. But I think it gives us a feeling of what this interior would be like. And we did it in about 20 minutes maximum. So we could as easily test another furniture arrangement. We could modify this. We could, in a few moments, know exactly what we wanted this interior to be. And that's the reason for making interior perspectives. For you, the designer, to decide what the interior can be in its best possible form. And you ought to be able to make these sketches quickly, dependably, And most of all, you ought to enjoy making them. They ought to be fun for you to make, because if you can get over that threshold where your drawings become enjoyable, you'll automatically draw more, and in a very brief period of time, you'll draw much better.